Finally, it's here. Starfield. The game that so many of us have been waiting for. A game that has so much resting on its shoulders. The reputation of Bethesda, Todd Howard and Xbox hanging in the balance. The ambition behind Starfield cannot be denied. Bethesda, which has made a name for itself for delivering some of the most iconic Western RPGs of all time, from Elder Scrolls, Skyrim and the Fallout series, is now tackling a whole new IP. A space RPG promising more freedom and a far grander scope than any game Bethesda has ever delivered before. The universe is a big place, and whilst it offers near infinite possibilities, its scope can also be daunting. But Bethesda took on the grand challenge, so the question remains, has Starfield delivered and met that challenge? Has Bethesda redeemed itself after the critical failure of Fallout 76? And does Xbox finally have a AAA first-party exclusive to finally shout proudly about? Let's discuss this and more in this spoiler-free video review of mine. In deciding to present gamers with a playground consisting of a universe with 1,000 worlds, immediately I had concerns about the substance of the core story experience being diluted. If Bethesda were going to heavily rely on procedurally generated content to pad their game out, that would not go down well. We have seen many games promise massive scale at the expense of gameplay depth, and after Fallout 76, there is no way Bethesda could forsake a strong story component. So, it's a big relief that one of Starfield's greatest strengths is its core story and how that facilitates some excellent gameplay scenarios and set pieces, hitting all the right science fiction tropes that you would want with a game of this setting, set in the future and in space, even daring to tackle some existential questions. Without offering spoilers, your character starts off rather grounded and, owing to a series of events, is propelled into a universal space mystery that revolves around a mysterious artifact and the origins of it. Courtesy of competent voice acting, an incredible soundtrack and some intriguing plot lines, most players will find themselves hooked with the story. From start to finish, I found myself intrigued by the premise of the game, and having conversations with some of my friends who have completed the game, I was astonished to find that my story played out vastly different to theirs, owing to the choices they made. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, considering this is a Bethesda RPG after all, and whilst you shouldn't expect the kind of insane variation the likes of Baldur's Gate will provide you, the variations are still notable. The manner in which the game handles New Game Plus content is also pretty interesting, and aside from the rolling credits, makes you feel like it is a continuation of your playthrough rather than a whole new restart of the game. If I can offer some advice, I would advise players to finish the core story first, and then go on to complete all the side objectives. Overall, the story left me satisfied, and did the job of immersing me into this rendition of the universe. Without a doubt, this is by far the best feeling Bethesda RPG I have ever played. Starfield often reminds me of Cyberpunk 2077 in how it mixes gunplay with its RPG elements. I've never really been a big fan of combat in Bethesda's past titles. Fallout's VAT system felt like a measure to enhance an already janky combat system, and Skyrim's mix of spells or melee combat never really resonated with me. Gunplay in Starfield feels as good as it looks, and in my opinion is one of its core strengths. There are loads of different weapons, all feeling unique in their own right. Shotgun shells pierce through enemies, causing them to collapse with suitable impact. Assault rifles pepper enemies, causing them to stagger. Pistols and rifles feel like they should. You get low gravity sections, loads of explosions sending dozens of objects flying everywhere, all adding to the spectacle. All this is enhanced by great level design and the variety of locales you play in, from interiors of ships or space stations to alien planets and cities. All of this is just incredible. Space combat feels quite satisfying as well. You're allowed to divert power to various elements of your ship, such as shields, weapons, or the grav drive, amongst others, and generally encounters feel great. Should you damage a ship enough, you are sometimes presented with the option of boarding a ship and hijacking it. Once you do so, you engage in combat inside the ship itself. This is the kind of freeform RPG mechanic that is most welcome and extends to other space stations that appear to be abandoned or housing rival factions who are fighting each other. I think the game could do a lot more of this kind of dynamism across the game. The enemy AI, however, lets the combat down considerably, and whilst benefiting from some basic AI routines like taking cover or crawling away when downed, you will often find that enemies become nothing more than cannon fodder. There are a variety of enemies, from humans, alien creatures, turrets, and robots, but other than their varying degrees of health, don't really offer that much of a challenge. I found that I only died a handful of times in the entirety of my playthrough on normal difficulty. But overall, the combat feels very tight and is built to last, and worthy enough to accommodate a wide variety of scenarios, which it needs to, especially to supplement the procedurally generated content. So much noise has been made about the performance of Starfield being locked at 30 frames per second, and rightly so. The narrative is tied to the promise of the Xbox Series X being the world's most powerful console, which has struggled to date to show off that power. Unlike Redfall though, in which the emission of 60 FPS was downright atrocious, especially considering the fidelity and scope of that game, I excuse Starfield for its 30 FPS performance. Why? Quite simply, I find the game's visuals, whilst admittedly inconsistent, absolutely jaw-dropping, primarily because of the employment of global illumination in the game. It truly brings the worlds you visit to life, and its visual impact is considerable. From the interiors of spaceships to bustling cities or alien planets you visit with either fauna or desert landscapes, global illumination is transformative to the game's visuals. I'm of the view that there is absolutely no way Todd Howard and company should have even considered forsaking global illumination. Doing so would compromise the visual integrity of the game to a degree that would probably make the game look rather dated. I'm confident that most players, upon playing Starfield, will understand why Bethesda elected to make the decision it did. Beyond the lighting, you will find some highly detailed textures throughout. Pop-in, whilst not completely absent, is actually surprisingly minimal considering the scale of Starfield, which is fundamental in not breaking immersion. I continue to be thoroughly surprised by the lack of LOD bugs in a title that often displays considerable visual density in its terrain, particularly more in forest-like environments. I find myself constantly using photo mode to capture awe-inspiring sights. Photos you take in the game can often appear in loading screens, which I think is a cool touch. The general NPCs that litter the game are probably the weakest point of Starfield, but the sheer volume of these NPCs really goes a long way in selling the idea of a bustling area. There are some incredibly designed cityscapes. I think Starfield is a gorgeous game in its own right. The soundtrack also deserves special mention. From strong orchestral scores to ambient or foreboding music, the audio does an exemplary job of immersing you into the various scenarios you face in the space RPG. The voice acting is a big improvement over Fallout and Skyrim, which suffered from stilted delivery. Skyrim's NPC dialogue is a literal meme after all. Starfield's biggest weakness is also one that I believe removes it from being in the conversation of Game of the Gen contender. Bethesda have tried to offer the scope of the entire universe, but the execution really is fundamentally lacking. Why? It all boils down to the frequency and manner in which Starfield breaks immersion. The game's heavy reliance on menus and loading screens acts as an abrupt shock, at times almost undoing the rest of Starfield's efforts to envelop you into this universe. Navigation is almost entirely dealt with by menus, and the illusion of the planets, even when you are facing them, are thinly veiled. A massive part of the appeal of Starfield, and what I believe was sold to us, was the grandeur of space that houses all these planets, and as much as I strained to be immersed into the theatre of stars, Bethesda's clinical approach to navigation just could not do it. I'm not suggesting Bethesda copy Elite Dangerous or Star Citizen, but even grossly simplifying their systems would have worked wonders. Navigation in space is intrinsically linked to our wonderment of space, and Bethesda marketed that vision. Docking spaceships is a big sci-fi trope, and I personally am bewildered by the fact that Bethesda did not make this a manual affair. All you simply do in Starfield is press A to dock your ship when the prompt appears. Your AI companions even sometimes comment with relief on the successful docking of your ship. This may sound like a trivial mechanic to some, but a big part of why space and the human endeavor is so fascinating to us in the first place is the high level of risk it poses to us. Not gamifying these elements is more than just a missed opportunity, in my opinion. Detractors may state that this would become cumbersome, but the leveling system could offer a solution to those that tire of it, much in the way the inventory capacity is handled in Starfield. You may have encountered the discourse surrounding No Man's Sky and how it handles planetary entries and exits, but I see no reason why Bethesda could not employ a little trickery, concealing those loading screens, even if those entries and exits practically increase the actual loading time in the background. The cumulative impact of menus and loading screens goes a long way in compromising the cogency of the exploratory experience that I was hoping would strongly accompany the core story and general gameplay. As a result, what you can do in space itself appears very limited, whereas it could have been an extension of the incredible spectacles you see on the ground. Some may say that they only expected a Bethesda RPG in space, but I think Bethesda were aiming for the stars, and they've come up a little short in that regard. So, does Starfield do what it needed to do? In my opinion, partially, depending on what your expectations were. It was always going to be impossible for Starfield to match the gargantuan levels of hype and expectations from a game that Bethesda, in its own words, stated was 20 years in the making. It also doesn't help that Xbox's own missteps serve to add a lot more pressure on Bethesda. But strip away all that background noise, and what you get with Starfield is an excellent RPG that helps the studio redeem itself with ease after the failings of Fallout 76. Starfield is a joyous experience despite its flaws and missed opportunities. This is Bethesda at its absolute best. The best looking Bethesda RPG, the best sounding Bethesda RPG, the best playing and feeling Bethesda RPG. Starfield clearly has benefited from the delay because it's as refined and polished as you can expect from Bethesda's trademark system-heavy game design, a game that is front-loaded with ample content that should hopefully keep players engaged for a long time. No two players will have the same experience. In this review, I didn't even mention the base and shipbuilding mechanics in the game. Even when I completed the core story, I was astounded by the nature of some of the side quests and just how big they were, how many various locations those quests took me to. The procedurally generated content that I encountered was of such high quality, it didn't really feel procedurally generated at all. So far, Todd Howard's words of these worlds feeling handcrafted is true. You have to admire the ambition, especially when in many ways that ambition bears fruit. All the staples of a successful Bethesda RPG are present here, and the early Steam player numbers of those paying $100 just to access the game a few days early don't lie. Players are already excitedly sharing their experiences. Xbox has finally got its AAA first-party exclusive worth shouting about. Yes, Starfield falls short of the real potential I believe it had, but Starfield offers a mesmerizing experience nonetheless, with the kind of RPG trappings Bethesda fans will absolutely adore. This may or may not be regarded as game of the gen, but Starfield will definitely be remembered as a classic RPG and a triumphant return for Bethesda.